The courtroom on the second floor of the federal building in Raleigh, North Carolina, smelled like recycled air, and the particular stillness of a room where important things are said into a record that cannot be taken back. My mother was at the defendant's table when I walked in. She looked at me the way she had looked at me my entire life, with the specific expression of a woman who has decided you are a problem she has been managing rather than a person she has been raising. She turned to her attorney and said something I could not hear. He nodded without looking up. She did not know yet what the judge had already read that morning. But to understand what happened when that judge finally spoke, you need to know who I was before any of this started, and what kind of grief my family decided to treat as an opportunity. My name is Donna Reese. I am 41 years old. I am a senior correctional officer at Polk Correctional Institution in Butner, North Carolina, assigned to the High Security Housing Unit, where I have worked for 14 years. Before that, I spent 2 years as a floor officer at Wake County Detention Center in Raleigh. I have been managing the specific category of human behavior that believes it has nothing to lose for 16 years, which means I have a working understanding of how people act when they think the rules do not apply to them, and how they act when they find out they were wrong about that. My first week at Polk, I was assigned to a cell block with a senior officer named Terrence, who had been there for 22 years and who said, on my first shift, exactly one instructional thing. He said, quote, 0. He was right. I have applied that principle outside of work more times than I can count. The first test tells you everything. I kept a photograph of my husband Marcus on the nightstand on his side of the bed for 2 years after he died. It was taken at Fort Bragg, North Carolina in 2016, the year before he deployed for the last time. He was in his uniform, squinting into the sun, with the specific expression of a man who is slightly embarrassed to be photographed and is trying not to show it. I have moved the photograph since then. It is on the bookshelf in the living room now, next to the folded flag from his service. It is still the first thing I look at every morning when I come downstairs. I had no reason to think my family had done anything wrong. That was the problem. Marcus died in 2020. A Department of Veterans Affairs medical complication, 18 months after he came home from his last deployment. He was 38 years old. We had been married for 9 years. We had a daughter named Imani who was 6 years old when her father died and who is 8 now and who keeps a drawing she made of him in a frame on her dresser that she has never once asked me to take down. I am telling you this because the money my parents took was not abstract. It was the Department of Veterans Affairs Dependency and Indemnity Compensation, the survivor benefit paid to the families of veterans who die from service-connected conditions. It was the specific amount the federal government determined was owed to Marcus Reese's wife and dependent child for his death in service to this country. It was $1,943 per month. My mother's name is Bernice. My sister's name is Layla. They are the two people I called first when Marcus died, before I called anyone else, standing in the parking lot of the Department of Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Durham at 11:20 at night in October, because they were my family, and that is what you do. My mother drove to my house and stayed for 2 weeks. She handled things I could not handle. She made phone calls. She sat with Imani. She organized the paperwork that accumulates around a death, the accounts, the notifications, the forms. I was grateful for every bit of it. I want to be precise about that because it matters to what comes next. I was genuinely grateful. I trusted her with things I could not manage myself, because I was not functional, and she appeared to be. She suggested the joint account in the 3rd week. She said it would make it easier to manage the incoming payments and estate deposits while I was getting back on my feet. She said she could help me track everything. She said it in the specific, gentle tone of a person who is being helpful, and I was a woman who had just buried her husband and could not yet read a bank statement without losing 20 minutes to grief. And I said yes. I signed the paperwork she put in front of me. I did not read it carefully. That is the thing I would not have done in any other context of my life. and it is the thing I did, and I am naming it because it is the accurate account. Layla knew about the account. She told me later she had not known what our mother was doing with it. I have thought about that statement for 2 years, and I still do not know how much of it is true. The early warning signs were small and carried reasonable explanations. My mother mentioned twice in the first year that the benefits were lower than she had expected. I assumed she had looked up the wrong rate. She asked once about whether I had considered moving into a smaller house, given the expenses. I told her Imani and I were fine. She dropped it. Layla stopped asking about finances entirely, which I registered at the time as tact, and understand now differently. I found out later that while I was working night shifts and getting Imani to school and trying to learn how to be a person again, my mother had changed the deposit routing on the Department of Veterans Affairs benefit payments to a separate account she controlled exclusively. She had done this in the fourth month. She had been collecting $1,943 a month for 31 months before I found out. I found out on a Tuesday evening in May of 2023. Imani was at my neighbor's house. I had the night off for the first time in 2 weeks. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with the intention of finally doing the financial review I had been postponing for 18 months. The full accounting of where things stood, what was coming in, what I had, what I needed to plan for. I opened the Department of Veterans Affairs payment portal on my laptop. I navigated to the payment history. I looked at the deposit account on file. The routing number did not match my account. I looked at it for about 15 seconds. My hands did not go cold. What happened was more specific than that. The noise in my head that had been running continuously for 2.5 years, the grief noise, the management noise, the getting through the day noise, all of it went completely quiet. I was left in a silence that had the specific quality of a cell block after a door slams. That half second when everything is very still and very clear before the next thing happens. I opened my notebook. I wrote down the routing number. I wrote down the account number. I wrote down the date of the last deposit and the amount. I wrote down 31 months multiplied by $1,943, which came to $60,233. I sat with that number for about 2 minutes. Then I called my mother. She picked up on the second ring. I read her the routing number. There was a pause of approximately 4 seconds. Then she said, quote 1. She said it calmly. She had clearly thought about what she would say if this call ever came. I said, quote 2. She said there had been household expenses, Imani's school supplies, groceries during the period when I was on reduced hours. She said it the way you describe reasonable expenditures, with the specific confidence of a person who has been rehearsing their justification long enough to believe it. I asked her to send me the record she had kept. She said she would have to find it. I said I would give her until Friday. I got off the phone and sat at the kitchen table in my quiet kitchen for a long time. The coffee was cold. Outside, the neighborhood was doing the ordinary things neighborhoods do at 7 in the evening. A lawnmower somewhere, a car slowing for the stop sign at the corner. I thought about Marcus. I thought about the flag on the bookshelf and the photograph next to it, and what those things represented, and what it meant that someone had looked at what his death had provided for his wife and daughter and had decided it was available. That was when I stopped grieving and started building. Now I want to be clear about where I was at that point. I had a routing number, a phone call, a number on a piece of notebook paper, and a mother who had just told me, without quite realizing it, that she had known this call was coming. What I did not have yet was the full picture of how it had been structured, who else had known, and what the legal classification of what she had done actually was. I had spent 14 years watching people believe they had gotten away with something, right up until the moment they discovered they had not. I knew what that moment looked like. I was going to make sure this one happened in a room with a federal seal on the wall and a record that could not be amended or explained away. What I was about to find out in the next 3 weeks would change every assumption I had made about how long this had been planned and how far it went. The first person I called was not an attorney. It was a woman named Connie Marsh, who had been a Department of Veterans Affairs benefits advocate in Durham for 19 years, and who I had met once, briefly, at a survivors support group I attended 4 times in the first year after Marcus died, and then stopped attending because the grief in that room was too large and too specific, and I could not be inside it for 2 hours every week and still function at work the next morning. Connie had given me her card at the first meeting. I had kept it in the accordion folder where I kept documents I might need. I called her on the Wednesday morning after the Tuesday I found the routing number. Connie picked up herself. I told her what I had found. She did not say anything for about 10 seconds. Then she said, quote 3. She said it carefully, the way she said everything, as if she was placing each word in exactly the right position. She said, quote 4. The name she gave me was Patricia Okafor, no relation to my old supervisor at Polk. A coincidence I noted and then set aside. Patricia was a federal benefits and veterans law attorney in Raleigh with 23 years of practice. She had a direct manner that reminded me of every good supervisor I had ever worked under, the kind of person who tells you exactly what is true and exactly what to do about it, without spending any time on what you wish were true instead. I was in her office on Thursday afternoon with my notebook, the routing number, the payment portal screenshots I had taken on Tuesday night, and the Department of Veterans Affairs benefits letter from 2020 confirming the monthly payment amount and my status as sole designated beneficiary. Patricia read the screenshots. She looked at the routing number. She pulled up a banking lookup tool on her computer and typed in the number. She turned the screen toward me. The account was registered to a business entity called BRM Household Services, LLC. Registered in North Carolina in 2021. The registered agent was Bernice Ruth Malone, my mother's maiden name. She had created a company to receive the deposits. She had not just rerouted the payments to a personal account. She had established a legal entity to receive federal veterans' benefits payments on behalf of a deceased veteran survivor. She had done this 4 months after Marcus died, while she was staying in my house and making phone calls and sitting with my daughter and organizing my paperwork. Patricia looked at me for a moment. She said, quote, 5, quote, I said I knew. She said, quote, 6, quote. She turned back to her computer. Quote, 7, quote. I drove home and wrote for 3 hours. I filled 11 pages of notebook paper. I am a person who documents things. It is a professional habit. I had not known I would need those notes, but I had them, because I had been keeping a personal log since my first week at Polk, as a way of tracking incidents and conversations that might matter later. And I had never stopped doing it even outside of work. My personal logs from 2020 forward filled 2 composition books. I brought both of them to Patricia on Monday morning. She read through them for 40 minutes while I sat across from her desk. When she looked up, she said, quote, 8, quote, I said yes. She said, quote, 9, quote, I said yes. She said, quote, 10, quote, the Department of Veterans Affairs. Inspector General's office opened a formal investigation within 2 weeks of my report. The LLC bank records came back through subpoena 3 weeks after that. Patricia called me on a Friday afternoon when I was in the parking lot of the grocery store, still in my uniform from a day shift, and read me the summary. The LLC account had received $60,233 in Department of Veterans Affairs survivor benefit payments over 31 months. Of that amount, $11,400 had been transferred to Layla's personal account in 7 separate transactions over 14 months, each one under $2,000. I sat in my car in the Kroger parking lot, and looked at the shopping list on my phone for a moment without reading it. 7 transfers, under $2,000 each, structured to stay below the reporting threshold. Layla had not just known. Layla had received a portion of it, in amounts specifically sized to avoid detection. I need you to understand what that second piece of information meant. My mother's actions had a shape I could follow from the beginning. The joint account, the LLC, the rerouting, the justification she had ready when I called. It was calculated, but it was legible. Layla's transfers were different. They were careful in a way that required specific knowledge of banking reporting thresholds. Someone had told her how to receive money in a way that would not be noticed. I do not know if that someone was my mother or someone my mother consulted. What I know is that my sister had accepted $11,400 from a federal veterans benefit payment belonging to her dead brother-in-law's family in carefully sized installments over 14 months and had said nothing to me through every phone call and every holiday and every time she looked at my daughter. Patricia called me after I had been quiet for about 30 seconds. She said, "I know." She said it the way Connie had said things precisely, without adding anything to it that wasn't needed. Then she said, quote 12, I said I understood. She asked if I was all right. I said I was in a grocery store parking lot in my uniform and I needed to buy milk and get home to my daughter, and that yes, I was all right. She said, quote 13. I went inside and bought the milk and the other things on the list and drove home and made dinner and helped Imani with her reading homework and did not tell her anything. That was the hardest part of all of it, not the investigation, not the legal process, not even what was coming in the courtroom. The hardest part was the ordinary evenings, doing ordinary things, knowing what I knew, and keeping it contained until the right moment. And then Patricia pulled the full LLC incorporation filing. And she saw the date. And she called me and told me to sit down before she said the next part. The LLC had been registered on October 19th, 2020. Marcus died on October 3rd, 2020. My mother had waited 16 days. 16 days after her son-in-law died. While my daughter was still sleeping in a bed with a stuffed animal her father had given her, my mother had sat down somewhere and registered a limited liability company designed to intercept the federal payment that would begin arriving the following month. Wait, it gets worse. Patricia had also pulled the joint account paperwork I had signed. The account I had signed in grief 3 weeks after the funeral. The one my mother had described as a way to help me manage incoming payments. The account had been established at a credit union where my mother had been a member for 11 years. The account terms, buried in the signature packet I had not read carefully, included a clause granting both account holders equal and independent withdrawal rights, with no notification requirement to the other holder. My mother had known that clause was there before she put the paperwork in front of me. She had used an institution she already knew, with terms she had already reviewed, to create an instrument she could operate without my knowledge from the day I signed it. Patricia's voice, when she explained this to me, had the quality it always had, level and precise. But there was something underneath it that I recognized from work, the specific flatness of a person who has seen a lot and is seeing something that still lands. She said, the LLC was the mechanism. The joint account was the cover. The timing of the LLC registration tells us the cover was prepared before the mechanism was even needed. She paused. Your mother did not see an opportunity and take it. She made a plan before she had confirmed the opportunity existed. She paused again. The prosecutor has everything. The hearing date has been set. Their attorney called Patricia 2 weeks before the hearing with a plea offer. My mother would plead to a single misdemeanor count, repay 50% of the diverted amount, and receive probation. No federal conviction, no record. Patricia called me and read it to me in the same level voice she used for everything. I said no. She said, I thought so. Then she said, I want to tell you something about what is going to happen in that courtroom. The prosecutor is going to ask your mother to explain. In her own words, why she did this. Federal judges ask that. And your mother is going to say something. I have read her deposition. What she says is going to be hard to hear. I want you to be ready for it. I asked her what my mother had said in the deposition. Patricia told me. I sat with it for a moment. Then I said I would be ready. Patricia said, I know you will. I want to pause here for a moment, because I think it is important to say what the weeks before that hearing were actually like, which was not dramatic and not organized, and not the steady, competent march toward justice that I would prefer to describe. It was shift work and school pickup, and a daughter who asked twice why I seemed far away, and to whom I said I was just tired, which was true but not complete. It was lying awake at 3 in the morning doing the math again, even though I already knew the math. It was driving to work, past the street where my mother lived, and not turning. I had everything I needed, but I hadn't told them that yet. And I was going to walk into that federal courtroom and let a judge hear my mother say, out loud, on a federal record, exactly what she thought of me and exactly what she thought she was owed. And I was going to sit in that room and let it happen, because I had spent 14 years learning that the most powerful thing you can do, in a room where someone is testing you, is to let them finish. Everything I had built over those 4 months, every document, every log entry, every subpoenaed record, every date, had been preparation for one room, one bench, one morning. Patricia had told me to let the prosecutor lead. I told her I understood that completely. What I also knew was that there was going to be one moment, one specific moment, when my mother said the thing she had been saying about me my entire life in the private language of family, and said it out loud in a federal proceeding, and the judge was going to respond to it. And I had been thinking about that moment for 3 months. I knew what my mother was going to say, Patricia had told me, and I knew exactly what I was going to do when she said it, which was nothing at all, because I did not need to do anything. I just needed to be in the room. We walked into the federal building in Raleigh at 8:56 in the morning. I remember the sound of the door. The federal courtroom on the second floor smelled like carpet cleaner, and the faint metallic trace of the ventilation system that ran continuously and quietly behind everything else. There were 6 rows of gallery benches, a raised bench for the judge, a prosecution table and a defense table separated by a strip of dark gray carpet that had been walked on enough to show the path between them. The American flag stood to the left of the bench. The seal of the United States District Court was mounted on the wall behind it. I had been in institutional spaces my entire working life. I was not uncomfortable. I sat at the prosecution table with Patricia beside me, and I put my hands flat on the table, and I waited. My mother came in with her attorney 2 minutes after we sat down. Layla had taken a separate plea agreement 3 weeks earlier, a federal misdemeanor, full restitution of her portion, 2 years probation. She was not in the courtroom. My mother wore a dark blue dress, and the specific expression she had worn my entire life, in situations where she wanted to appear reasonable to people whose opinion she needed. She looked at me when she came in. It was the same look from my whole childhood. The one that said I was a variable she was accounting for rather than a person she was in a room with. She sat down and turned to her attorney and did not look at me again. The judge was the Honorable Sandra Fitch, United States District Court for the Eastern District of North Carolina, who had been on the federal bench for 17 years. Patricia had told me she was precise, that she had a specific intolerance for explanations that were designed to obscure rather than clarify, and that she read every filing before she entered a courtroom. Judge Fitch entered at 9:03. We stood. She sat, opened the file, and looked at it for a moment without speaking. Then she looked up at the defense table and addressed my mother's attorney directly. She said she had reviewed the government's filing and the defendant's response and that she had some preliminary observations. She said the LLC registration date and the first diverted payment date created a timeline that the court found significant. She asked the defense whether the defendant disputed that timeline. The attorney said his client did not dispute the dates but wished to provide context. Judge Fitch said she would hear the context at the appropriate time. The prosecutor, an assistant United States attorney named Marcus Webb, which I noted with a private stillness that I kept entirely to myself, presented the case in 31 minutes. He was organized and exact. He walked through the LLC registration, the joint account terms, the payment diversion, the 31 months, the $60,233, the structured transfers to Layla's account. He named each document as he cited it. He did not use adjectives. He placed a timeline exhibit on the screen that showed every date in sequence, beginning with October 3, 2020, the date of Marcus's death, and ending with the date of my Department of Veterans Affairs portal review in May of 2023. Every event on that timeline had a document number next to it. My mother's attorney offered mitigation. He described her as a grieving grandmother who had been providing essential support to a daughter in crisis. He said the funds had been used for family expenses and that his client had intended to provide a full accounting when her daughter was emotionally ready to receive it. He said the word family 4 times. He said the word support 3 times. Judge Fitch looked at the mitigation statement for a moment. Then she said she would hear from the defendant. My mother stood. She had her hands folded in front of her at the defense table. She began by saying that she had only ever tried to help me, that I had not been capable of managing my own affairs after Marcus died, that someone had needed to take charge of the situation, and that she had done what she believed was necessary because, and I want to be precise about what she said next, because she said it clearly and on the record in a federal proceeding, because Donna had never been able to handle difficult things on her own, and the family had always known that. The room was very still. Judge Fitch looked at my mother for a long moment without writing anything down. Then she looked at me. I was sitting with my hands flat on the table and my face arranged in the expression I used on the cell block when someone was testing me, which is not anger and not coldness, but a very specific neutrality that communicates that I have heard what was said and am not moved by it. My mother's attorney said his client meant only to convey the context of the family's concern for the defendant's daughter's well-being. Judge Fitch said, quote, 20. She said it quietly. She wrote something on her notepad. Then she looked at my mother and said, quote, 21. She let that sit for a moment. Nobody in the room moved. Outside, through the single window to the left of the bench, a city bus went by on the street below, and its sound came through the glass briefly and then was gone. Judge Fitch sentenced my mother to 14 months in federal prison, full restitution of $60,233 plus interest, and 3 years of supervised release. She noted for the record that the premeditated nature of the offense, specifically the LLC registration 16 days after the death of the victim's spouse, elevated the conduct beyond opportunistic fraud into a category the court treated with significant seriousness. She said, the victim in this case is a federal law enforcement officer who was widowed at 38 years old and who trusted her family during the most difficult period of her life. The court wants that noted. I said one thing in that courtroom. At the end of the proceeding, when Judge Fitch asked if the victim wished to make a statement, I stood up and said, Marcus Reese served this country for 11 years. The benefit was his. That's all I have. I sat down. Patricia did not look at me, but I saw her write one word on her notepad, which I did not read. I did not need to. The room was very quiet after Judge Fitch concluded and left the bench. My mother was speaking in a low voice to her attorney. She did not look at me. I did not look at her. I gathered my folder and stood and walked out. In the corridor, I went to the single-stall restroom near the elevator and ran cold water over my wrists for 30 seconds. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked like a person who had just done something that needed doing. I dried my hands and straightened my badge, which I had worn to the hearing because it was mine and I had earned it and I was not going to leave it in the car. Then I walked back out. Patricia met me in the corridor near the elevator. She did not say anything immediately. She stood next to me while we waited, and then she said, "The judge's statement about Marcus is going to be in the public record." She paused. "I thought you should know that." I said I was glad. She said she was too. She shook my hand with both of hers briefly and then stepped into the elevator. My mother reported to the Federal Correctional Facility in Alderson, West Virginia, 8 weeks after the hearing. The restitution payment came in the form of a lien on her house, which was sold 14 months later. The proceeds covered the full amount with $4,100 remaining, which the court distributed to me. I put it in Imani's education account without telling her where it came from. Layla called me 6 days after the hearing. She said she had not known about the LLC. She said she had thought the transfers from our mother were from our mother's own money, that she had not asked where it came from because she had not wanted to know, and that she understood now what that meant. She said she was sorry. There was a silence after she said it. Not an empty one, but the kind that has weight in it. The kind that forms when an honest thing has been said, and both people know it is not enough, and also know it is all there is. I said I heard her. She said she hoped Imani was doing well. I said Imani was fine. We stayed on the line for another moment, and then we said goodbye. She has not called since. I have not called her. I do not know what that means yet, and I have stopped trying to decide. There is one more thing I haven't told you yet. 2 years after the hearing, on a Tuesday morning in October, I sat at my kitchen table with coffee and the mail and found a card with a postmark from Alderson, West Virginia. My mother's handwriting on the envelope. I held it for a moment without opening it. Then I put it on the table and drank my coffee and looked out the window at the yard where Imani had left her bicycle the night before, still on the grass because she never remembered to put it away, which is something I correct every single time and which has not yet produced any change in behavior. After I finished the coffee, I picked the card back up and opened it. It said, "I know you won't believe me, but I did it because I love you, and I didn't think you could do it alone. I still don't." There was no signature. I read it twice. Then I put it in the accordion folder where I keep documents that might matter someday, which is where things go when I do not know yet what they are. I work the day shift now, 7 to 3, which means I am home when Imani gets off the bus. On Tuesday afternoons, we sit at the kitchen table and she does her homework and I do paperwork, and we are in the same room without needing to say much, which is a thing I learned from my grandfather before I lost him, and which I'm trying to pass forward. She is 8 years old, and she is precise, and she does not miss things, and she looks exactly like her father, and I tell her that when she asks, directly, without softening it, because she deserves the accurate answer. The photograph of Marcus is on the bookshelf next to the folded flag. I look at it every morning. I have not moved it again, and I do not plan to. What I actually learned from all of this is not the thing I expected to learn. I expected to learn something about the specific coldness required to plan a theft while your family is in crisis. What I learned instead was more precise than that. People who decide you are not capable of handling your own life will make that decision before they have any evidence for it. And they will keep that decision long after the evidence contradicts it, because the decision was never about evidence. It was about what they needed to believe in order to do what they wanted to do. My mother decided I could not handle things on my own sometime before Marcus died. She carried that decision into a federal courtroom and said it out loud under oath. The judge noted it for the record. I did not need to say anything else. The record said it for me. The accordion folder is in the third drawer of my desk. The card from Alderson is in it. I have not read it a third time. I might. I have not decided yet. What I know is that I have been in that room, on the record, and everything that needed to be said was said by someone other than me, and that is the most complete kind of right I know how to name. Marcus's photograph is on the bookshelf. The flag is next to it. They have been there for 2 years, and they are not going anywhere. If any of this is familiar to you in some part, I would want to hear about it in the comments below. And if you want to know what was in my mother's deposition, the part Patricia warned me about before the hearing, I have not told that part of the story yet.